Okay, can everyone hear me clearly? Yeah? Okay. So I'm really pleased to introduce Martin Despang, the lecturer for the AAC lecture series tonight. They asked me to say a few words about Martin, and I thought it could be best summed up by how I came to know Martin. So when I was a student here, I went to Des Moines to this little bookstore where they had architectural books and purchased this book on small architecture. And one of the feature projects in the book was the project that Martin refers to as the aha song, Take On Me of his career, the thing that he can never quit talking about. But one of his first big internationally published projects, a series of transit stations. And they really captured my attention because they lived at both the small and the large scale, and they reacted to their individual environments with these really sensitive material responses that were customized to each location throughout the city of Hanover. The second piece is I knew a lot of people when I was practicing in Omaha who had gone to school at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and they were all really excited about a professor that was teaching at University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Martin. And so they would tell me about their mentor, Martin, always send off the work they were doing to Martin to get feedback. And these are people several years into their career. And lastly, when I finally met Martin in real life was at a conference, and he was very humble and deferential, and we talked for about an hour and a half before he finally admitted that he was Martin Despang of Despang Architekten. And so just his very kind and approachable attitude and being a very solid educator, I think really sums up the reasons that we've invited him to be here tonight. So this intersection of practice at a very high level and also educating at a very high level. So please join me in welcoming Martin Despang.
Thank you so much. And don't walk away. I need you for another second. All right. Thank you very much for having me here. It means a lot to me. Thank you, Chris, for the wonderful hosting here and welcoming. And I'm going to start talking where I am right now. I'm going to go in reverse order. And where I'm right now, there are some certain rituals in place that I want to celebrate here. So you are getting something here from me. I can make this work. Sure I can. So this is the Aloha Lei here. Again, thank you very much. And there's another one I got to give out to someone who walked far away that's also very special to me in my career. So I'm going to walk all the way up. Should have told you before. Aloha.
Thank you so much.
So I'm going to wear one also to be culturally correct. And it's going to be this one here. As you can tell. Here you go. And there's multi-meaning to that here, which also is one of the principles in architecture that Kel and I share about that everything should have multiple duties. So this comes from the World Soccer, by the way, that we had not that long ago. But there's also some red in there, right? So that alludes to you guys here. The picture I took, I found this sort of compelling when you guys flew me in. And this is in Denver Airport. So thank you for your hospitality that extends that. Chris basically said, we're flexible if you want to combine that with, visiting friends or family in the area. And so I said yes very much. And so I've been a student and started off my academic career at UNL in Lincoln, Nebraska, next door. So thank you guys. You gave me the chance to reconnect to my home away from home. So that's how I came. So I stood there at the gate and I saw my two homes my sort of home away from home and my current home being together, and I could only almost see where I live right now. So this lecture is really about, you have a theme, and I wanted to contribute to that as talking about the circumstantially substantial. And there have been circumstances in my life that made me move on quite a bit. And the place I'm currently, I want to talk about first, but my journey basically had really made me aware how different geographies and climates inform cultures. And I want to take you on a journey. It's going to be more a marathon, sort of an Ironman if you want. So this is actually how we welcome people when you come to Honolulu International Airport. So it's a long horizontal portrait, and I was lucky to find a place where this is my view on a daily basis here. I look at Diamond Head, and there's some real nature and wildlife there. And you probably want to say, well, lucky you, you made it. But I will not even argue that, but then there's another way to look at that same picture, which makes us aware that something about the island of Oahu, where Honolulu is, that has to do with our discipline, with our profession, the built environment. Yeah, if you don't mind turning the lights down a little bit, it would be nice. Thank you, that easy. So, and the red thread of this lecture here is that this is a premiere. You're the guinea pigs. I heard that Kristen said I'm the guinea pig for her hosting, but you're the guinea pigs for me saying something that I hadn't allowed myself before, is talking about the more encompassing way I look at what I'm doing professionally and academically, and I want to structure it with these icons. They talk about that. I believe that architecture is basically human activity and event that becomes spatialized, and only then at the very end becomes form, and never the other way around. So this is what when I look down from that paradisic place that I just showed you, and it shows you something that bothers me, and this is that. There's no emission control. I have to swipe we call it lanai, which we call balcony here. I have to swipe that twice a week, and I get the darkest slut out of it. So that makes me think about the culture. This is here the way people used to live, and in every indigenous culture, everything was figured out. We call this a hupua, which was basically slicing the islands into pie-shaped pieces, and the ones at the mountains cut the wood and brought it down to the ones on the ocean. They made the canoes, and the one in the middle were doing farming. And it worked pretty well, you can say, because of the isolation. We were 100% self-sustained. Today we're only 10%. This food here mostly comes from the mainland, gets trucked in with fossil fuel. So yes, we're in the middle of everywhere, nowhere. That sounds familiar to you, because that's what I always had to defend myself when I was in Lincoln, when everyone said, where the hell is Lincoln? And I said, just close your eyes and gravitate sort of intuitively towards the middle of the map. The island itself of Oahu doesn't have that chance to be in the middle because we're surrounded by mountains. So it only has one way to actually grow, and it grows excessively is out to the west. So this is from research that we did in the Bishop Museum, the way one used to live, and this is how one lives. And Cal and I was just talking about a studio in Las Vegas as being, originally our least favorite place of where we see everything we believe in being materialized. So this could be suburban Las Vegas, but in fact, it's unfortunately Hawaii. So you see this contrast of this background that just like blows me away on a daily basis, and you see us, my students and I, looking at the houses that they're currently building. And currently this is the Department of Hawaiian Homelands who is making sure that Hawaiians can still make a living where everything is so endangered to be basically hijacked by commercialism and capitalism. And when you come to Hawaii, you can actually see that the way to live in Hawaii is roof architecture. All you need is to shelter yourself from the sun, and the rain. This is a holly of a friend of mine, and that basically says is that does the job. Keep the sun out, who's always something to shy away from, and keep the rain out. That does the job. So it's a little bright here, I apologize, but that's Beamer, I guess. So we looked into what are these values. We don't want to look at things sentimentally. We want to really do a reality check, which of these values might still be applicable to a new way of living. And I was approached to work with this Department of Hawaiian Homelands and my School of Architecture and the Building Industry Association to provide a potential new way of dwelling in Hawaii. And we came up with this sort of diagrammatic analysis here. We ended up having to work in Hawaii has 12 climate zones out of the 14 existing in the world. This is the least one where anyone would have ever settled back in the days. This is the desert in Kapolei, that subdivision called. So this diagram shows how we thought about how the Western American way of utilizing land and how we could sort of transform that. Just came from an exciting studio that Ulrika and Chris ran about, you know, how's your building reacting to an environment performatively, and whereas here it's confining your surface, your ratio between volume and surface. Out there where we have 74 degrees year-round, day and night, it's basically exploding your surface. So that's what this diagram tries to say. Designing for us became, once again, designing inside out. This is part of the design team here, looking at the beautiful surroundings and designing that building. We call the building H home because the floor plan looks like the letter H, and it's 4 pavilions that gravitate towards the central holly space. And we had to go up against a pretty watered down, westernized stick frame home that I will show you in a couple seconds. And so we had to go up with a prototype against the serial type. Down there, the diagrams show that we just wanted to provide the main infrastructure that the people could then customize and build to their needs. It shows the central holly space and how a house is not fixed, but a house is dynamic. A house can adjust to the changing needs of its occupants. This is me bicycling on my way to work, and basically, you know, I'm really affected and informed by what I see on a daily basis on the street. And this is pointing out to us what I already knew, that everything is through the roof in Hawaii here. And the one that's most is the cost of food. And so the house as well is thinking about itself as a device for a better well-being. So you should, again, once you have 12-month growing cycle, so you should grow your own food in your house. So there are these negative spaces, as we would call it, which are productive green potential. And the house to the street is a very humble house that's very low-key, literally and figuratively speaking, and just positions the public functions of the kitchen and lanai, which is the most favorite space of the Hawaiians, because they basically sit outside, sheltered by the rain and the sun, and engage the public. If you put these buildings in a row, which usually means monotony, here I think could mean diversity and duality and plurality, where these courtyards on the side are basically forming bigger ones with a neighbor. So in Hawaii, the principle of ohana, meaning family, is still pretty much intact. And so when the children grow out their parents' home, they can basically buy one next door, and so their parents are close, but still separated, so they can have their separate lives, but yet be connected. So the interstitial space in between becomes communicative. It's not wasted space as the American tract home model has. And then very important is, how do you build this house here? And in Hawaii, we have to close to no building material left. Wood has been shipped to China, the sandalwood, long time ago. At least they made beautiful shrines out of it. The koa wood is close to be gone. So the woods that we use comes from Pacific Northwest of the mainland, gets cut here and termite treated over there, and then gets shipped. So by the time it comes there, it's not a local building material. It's basically an imported one. So this is on my way to work, where it took them like almost a year to put a house together, and the contractor has this great name, Great Wall Construction. And then they foam it. We just talked about that in studio here, Ulrika's and Chris's. So what do we what do we inhale? Can we trust that foam? I'm not sure. Sorry, switched over. We put all this stuff together. We talk in studio about layering. You know, we put this turquoise is probably a sewage pipe or something like that. We make a colonial column out of that. And this, I'm teaching structures in Hawaii, and I call it qualitative structural and bioclimatic performance. So this totally threw me off because here they're stuccoing an arch, whether it's not supposed to or it doesn't need to be an arch. So there's this sentimentality, and this is the final product, which I think really speaks, you know. Is that the new Hawaii way of living with a muscle car and the air conditioning unit sticking out of the window? And the arch is talking that I'm Polynesian and culturally sensitive. So this puzzles us. I take the students out to the little industries and construction business we have. So we propose, you know, we look at the old, but we don't look at it literally. We analyze that, we diagram it. We propose for the central Hali a system that's basically louvers on tracks, aluminum that you can open and close. So you can literally engage the elements. So then we cover the central Hali space with that. So when there's light on in the central Hali space, the buildings start to glow, and that alludes to what Chris and Kel are wearing, the lei, their kikuyu nuts, and the Hawaiians found out that if they burn their oil, they can light up the tiki torch. So it's sort of connecting to tradition, but it's doing this in a contemporary way. So this became the most important strategic drawing because everything we did, the more we did, everyone said it looks great, but it's too expensive, it's luxurious, it's exclusive and not inclusive. So we did this explosive axon to basically say it's a kit of parts. And this is the strategy to make it very, very competitive. And we go into the details of detailed material research here. Something I got early into is that there's something you call thermally modifying wood. You expose wood to heat and it transforms the cell, makes it more resistant. So we're proposing to plant to be determined species of wood. Then we befriend Pele, the god of the volcanoes, to give us her heat, geothermally run the kiln, and basically use the sea salt for the termite treating, because we're also paradise for termites. So we need to work on that. So that's the vision. This is us and the final product on a trade show, you can say, of the local building industry. And we were very, very encouraged and reinforced by the local community to get it. They were saying, we don't mind where you come from. We don't know what, we feel you care for us. This is really a way to go. It's very encouraging. By the same time, half around the world, 7,000 miles away, where we're dealing with a similar phenomenon of how we as Western civilizations basically get sentimental, because we rented a building for our office branch there, and the rent got too expensive. So it was more, we thought it was made more sense to build a building of our own, by ourselves. So here you see the vernacular. These are 300, 400-year-old log timber homes in Bavaria. This is in southern Germany. And they made this subdivision where we are has the toughest design guidelines. Everything is prescribed. Stucco on the ground floor, wood on the top floor, roof angle, roof overhang, everything. So this is what the building industry, the developers do. They jam a house together and then they just mask it with these synonyms, and no one thinks about, which is the title of the theme of my talk here, which is substance versus surface. So this is my history teacher in Lincoln, Keith Sawyers, who taught me a lot, and he taught me about Rudolf Schultner's King's Roadhouse. And so we looked into that. We worked with the concrete industry, a prefab sandwich panel. Today in studio we talked a lot about that. Leaving this exposed, it works as thermal mass. It has its beauty and its rawness. This is my youngest son, Lenny, having a piece of CLT that we drilled out of it. So cross-laminated timber, something you guys are interested in, I saw in studio, which is great. Both, again, prefabricated, short distance logistics. Put it together in a couple days. This is the newest member of our architectural family, my nephew Julian, who walks up from the concrete plinth to the wooden top floor, and my sister and business partner Cynthia are basically working in the space. So you can see, this is the old one, this is the new one, and from the distance people think it's heritage preservation, contextual. The closer they get, they're not so sure anymore, and they ask us, when is it going to be finished? Because all we do, we say the rain screen is not the wood anymore. It's basically the Tyvek, and we looked for a black Tyvek that doesn't have any print on there. And the wood, which is thermally modified poplar in this case here, it's just basically the wind security, so the Tyvek doesn't get blown away. I think the real innovation is sort of the typology and adjusting. I'm happy to see a large, not majority, but a large amount of female emerging architects here, but I probably don't tell you a secret that we know society is discriminating you in life and in the profession, because few of you end up being in the profession. My sister didn't want to accept that. She wants to be an architect and a mother. So the house is basically conceptualized to be an emancipatory device, if you want. So, and the black lines are basically walls you can insert later on to subdivide the house once things might not go the way you expected it to be. Things happen, they might get divorced, hopefully not. A business might slow down, hopefully not, but who knows, right? So the house is basically prepared and they're prepared. And then we're staying in the same typology, but we talked about that in the studio. The most responsible house in a larger sense is the one you don't build, because whatever you build, you always create an effort and a footprint. So that doesn't get us architects so excited, right? Because we want to build. So the second most responsible, trying to avoid to say sustainable, is the one that already exists. And so here, a version of this is my other view looking at the ocean, which is beautiful until this happens and the ships come in and they truck in the shipping containers. On the Big Island, you probably heard this is going on currently. So the question is, how do you really build under all these circumstances? And I never thought I would get excited about shipping containers, but I recently looked into shipping containers as a building material and making a project that I'm going to do with the students as a design to be built project in the spring. And as Chris said, this lecture gives me the opportunity to also reflect on how much you guys and your peers, my students, have informed me and have taught me. And I have to say, sometimes you guys, they taught me more than I taught them, or hopefully in balance. So this is Amber Ellett with a thesis about rethinking the very American typology of trailer homes. She's a visiting assistant professor at Fay Jones School of Architecture herself now. I'm very proud of her. She won second prize in the Boston Society Architects Award in the Pursuit of Housing a couple of years ago. It's basically based upon rethinking that typology. She made them very, very light, carbon fiber based, and so the occupant could turn the dwelling themselves due to social and environmental impacts. And that way it's sort of abstractly inspired by what sunflowers do on a field. So again, I said, if we can keep buildings, and for the longest time in school I thought, okay, dealing with existing building stocks is for people who can't design, right? Now I actually think the opposite after I've been approached by a couple of projects. This one here, this is also a 300-year-old home, but in northern Germany, where Ulrike and I come from. We don't have a lot of wood, so we use wood more sparsely. We call this Fachwerk, half timbered. And we converted this into a dwelling of the farmer's daughter who had married a doctor and they had a child, and they originally wanted to tear the house down. And we asked them to give us a week to convince them that what they wanted we could achieve in a new house. So we took out a lot of the sod brick infill, replaced it with a new thermal and spatial threshold, and everyone was surprised how contemporary the house looks like. I was running something for years with the community of Albion, Nebraska. We call it Repioneering Albion. And it's basically working against the problem of hollowing the middle, which probably sounds pretty familiar to you guys who are from the countryside here, right? That these small towns are dying out. So we did a couple of studios. This is Megan's proposal, where she basically said we inventorize, we archive everything that the old house has, and we take it apart. and then we sort of deassemble it. And she only used the parts that she basically had from the existing house. We did that to a 2-story house, apartment house in Hanover, where we strategically added outdoor space, balconies, lanai to the house, and we, you know, they're not sentimental. They're really kind of sort of rejuvenative efforts to keep the houses in the life cycle, both sort of physically and culturally. And I'm increasingly doing that in Honolulu now, where Waikiki, we have the 4th largest skyline in the US. We have 462 high-rises. And most of them have been built in the 1960s, and they're terribly outdated. And so I think it's really up to us now to tackle that, and the students did a phenomenal job. It gets us back to, I've been in the sort of typology of single dwelling, which itself is to be looked at critically in Honolulu. We have also, we hit a lot of records, and they're questionable. This is H1. It's an interstate that doesn't connect another state, as we know, right, to begin with. And it's the artery for sprawl. There are 170,000 people traveling forwards and backwards. And these are the people who can't afford to live in Honolulu anymore. They have to do that. It's not that they want. And that's why they provide these cheap houses that then don't make them even feel they live in Hawaii anymore. So there's something seriously wrong. And this is, you know, me in traffic jam and taking pictures. I see all this traffic, get depressed, but then I see the beauty of the mountains and I get uplifted again. And this is what re-energizes me. This is what drags me down again. There's Howard Hughes Corporation is pumping out 22 towers in downtown, between downtown and Waikiki. They're all glitzy, you know, form-based towers here. They want to look cool. But they are not cool because they use fixed glazing, which is wrong, because we have the most beautiful, natural air conditioning, which is called trade wind air conditioning, right? This traces back to the early trade from the United States to Hawaii, which started in the Pacific Northwest. And due to the wind direction from northeast, they set their sail and went straight down. And this is the one we should utilize, and not these imported sort of invasive kind of species. So I'm running a studio right now where we try to see, can we apply these principles the way they used to live to a vertical structure. And as Chris was pointing out, not naming him, but this is Matt DeBoer. He's one of the guys who talked to us, and we talked to each other through him, not knowing about each other. So this is a project for Lincoln, Nebraska, which he called the Environ Dynamic Tower. So this is a project I promised some of the students in the crit that I will show. This is sort of my reference. It's an urban infill project that we call the Treetop Apartments. Very simple on one page. This is the execution. This is how you really take advantage of the rich urban green. This is the concept, and this is the form that results out of that, but not the other way around. And threw this in last night because this is about tectonics, of course, the fine grain. It's using very simple, materiality, but then wherever the public touches the private, we use wood behind glass, which creates a thermal buffer and helps the energy performance of the building. Oops, there was one more, sorry. That's very important. This is thanks to my students. These are currently working on this vertical apua, and we work with Kamehameha Schools, who are one of the largest landowners, and they're basically administrating their culture. And we have a really, really great critical discourse about potential innovative and improving ways to make a living for basically everyone who is sort of more inclusive in a society and culture, which actually makes the culture as opposed to the exclusive. So next typology is about, that 40–50% of the energy is consumed by what we do, the built environment. 30% is transportation. So whenever it's too far to walk, we should use something else than this sort of autistic fossil fuel combustion engine driven tin can. But public transportation, Honolulu unfortunately is doing this. This is heavy rail, right? I wouldn't think you would do this anymore, I think you do this in the 70s if you ever come to Honolulu, and I hope. But be prepared, you drive under a viaduct that goes on for miles and miles and miles that we're building in the 70s for the car. So they're doing this again. This is Kiewit Construction out of Omaha doing that. And they think they, again, make it culturally sensitive by throwing on ornaments on the concrete. which I put out for discussion because that's what it will end up being. It's another monster. It's another intrusion on an environment. And I found this book here. This is the way it used to be. Isn't that a beautiful title, Breezing Through Paradise? All you need is a streetcar, which actually, every American city should get that back. It was a pretty good way to get around, and it used to be around, so it's nothing new. So at the same time, we're working on a typology for Germany. We put light rail underground because everything is so packed and dense. So we were asked by the city of Bochum to cover escalators that always broke due to the exposure to rain and snow. And so the program was pretty basic, that was it. And then there was a pretty restrictive code that says, the structure has to withstand the impact of a truck. So some of us here are not necessarily big fans of postmodernism where you made things bigger than they should be. So I was pretty afraid this is going to be a déjà vu with postmodernism and end up with huge columns here. Somehow I flipped through so fast here. So Chris and I talked about, what is context? To what degree is context? And it's never the literal, immediate context, but it's a broader context. So in which city is this? Bochum is the city of Opel, and Opel became eaten up by GM, and GM got in trouble, so Opel got in trouble, Bochum got in trouble, Martin got in trouble. This project has been on hold for 12 years. There's a beautiful immediate context by a wonderful architect, classic modern Gerhard Graupner, who was a professor in Hanover and built in Bochum. What a coincidence. And yes, there's material context. This has been the steel belt, and it still is, of Germany, sort of the Pittsburgh of Germany. So that informed us to do these canopies. As opposed to doing few columns, we basically said we do many little ones, and we make them out of steel. So this is, sort of the situation. At the same time, we said, talk about double duties, multiple meanings, right? At the same time, the structure that is now sort of filigree and helps each other in the case of an impact is doing something that it's adjusting your eye if you come out from the dark and you get into the bright. So they become these sort of almost, man-made kind of trees in the urban landscape. And once again, they take advantage of something that is dooming, which is climate change. We have this flooding going on more and more. This is a real picture. This happened to the station. It's kind of was the need for the project. But instead of getting depressed about climate change, we basically said, cool, then let's do something about it. And so again, this is the competition model we did many years ago. Now the nickname of the project is Urban Waterfalls, because the water is basically, we simplified. The water comes off the edge and falls off the edge and creates this beautiful sort of notion of water falling. And they become these objects, these infrastructural objects in the urban landscape. Project, we always did a precursor, like a warm-up exercise for fourth year. This is in Lincoln, Kelly Hiskey, who basically looked into the nature of waiting, short-term occupancy, bonsai architecture, right? And she said, sometimes you like the people, they're waiting with you, sometimes not, sometimes it's cold, sometimes it's warm. So she created the sort of Arne Jacobsen egg chair kind of structures that go on tracks, and you can just go crazy and do whatever you want. Turn away from you, put them together when there's a blizzard coming through. So where did we learn all that? Hopefully here, and we do this right now, and you do great work here. I've been walking through the building and the studios, and it's pretty amazing what you guys do. So this is a university project here up in Manoa. This is where my university is, and you got this beautiful lush green mountains, and then you got these stupid wall architecture pieces here. They're really, really not supposed to be there. We have a department, that's the Department of Tropical Plants and Soil Science, and they do really critical work, aquaponics, all this good stuff. And they reached out to me and said, Martin, we need to facilitate all that. We need to build a building. Can you give us some ideas? And my idea was to basically, be texture, be architecture more than architecture in that case. I should say hi from this guy. I said, we have close to no building material, but this is our main guy. This is Les Campers. He's an Iowa boy. He is on the advisory council of this school here, as he told me. And I immediately, when I work with concrete, I reach out to him. So I upfront the making of architecture into the thinking. This is us trying to flesh out. So the idea is an exoskeleton a framework that basically always shades the building to the south with the horizontals, to west and east with the verticals. We just talked about that in studio. And then the infill gets basically choreographed by the people who are basically putting their plans in there. So the building, once again, methodology inside out becomes, the light becomes filtered, the air gets filtered, and at night it becomes a self-glowing beacon that basically demonstrates the light and shade. Just like the head of the woman, the building is basically filtering and doing the job as blending in, being a natural environmental control device. And I make these into little, we don't have really a curricular format, so I make an elective out of these, and they become these, I call it tree texture. So that's the kind of the level of work the students get out of that. So again, how do cultures are informed by climate? My years in Tucson, Arizona, where I went after Nebraska, is nature again is my biggest educator. The Palo Verde tree, I don't know how many knows that. So a tree, can't afford leaves anymore because they get burned away. So basically, the whole tree, gets rid of the leaves, but it needs photosynthesis. So the whole tree, including everything, gets green. How amazing, I think. And sort of, we don't, the times of the indigenous are gone, but the principles are still there. If you go to a big box store, grocery store, people first seek shelter in the shade. And, this is a project here. Sometimes we kind of make projects out of conditions where there aren't. So this is a client just asked us to, fix the balcony or the terrace, the roof terrace, because it leaked. And we basically talked to him. We said, what do you do on the roof terrace? And he said, well, sometimes I step out there, but then mostly it's too hot or too cold. So really, I just don't do anything. But it leaks through, so you got to fix that. And we looked into it, and we looked into, Rudolf Schindler's house has these sleeping bags. Or in 1908, people in New York City discovered that sleeping on the roofs might be a good thing because it's cooler in the summer. So it's another idea to take climate change and hotter nights as something that could encourage us to react architecturally. So this is the project that came out of it, thermally modified beach. Just in creating a little threshold, a little folly for a client to have a nap every once in a while. So nature again, on my way to school, the symbiosis of this bird digging in holes into a saguaro cactus and creating its own natural air conditioning, pretty amazing. I always think if only we would be anywhere close to be as clever as them. So I ran into the oldest university, one of the oldest universities in Germany is in Göttingen, and they wanted a kindergarten. And again, it's just demonstrating how we think, I think very multifaceted. So this guy here got us in trouble because he's a prairie dog, and he probably would laugh because prairie dogs don't seem endangered species to you, but over there they are. And the whole campus, which sounds familiar to you, is an arboretum, basically. So everywhere we wanted to build was either the prairie dog or some trees that we couldn't build. And at the same time, I was looking into sort of the landscape, and finally we remembered Le Corbusier doing the Monol houses parallel to the Domina houses, and you called them the female houses under the cloudy sky. So we basically took all these things together and said we're going to make the building as part of the landscape. And so in plan it's a non-building, but it's taking advantage of the synergy of the building to the east where the entrance is basically situated. And this is the building, which there is no building. This is the neighboring building. And this is where I'm hoping that in the future they do what I propose, is that they can grow their herbs and their fruits and their vegetables and they can bring them down, and because they have a kitchen where they can prepare fresh food. There's this ledge here that indicates it is architecture. Multi-purposing, this becomes like the ledge for the bar at night. The campus students having a party and they use it and are up there, and in the morning it becomes, the kindergarten becomes the balustrade so people don't fall off the edge. Upfronting materiality had to be on a really, really small budget. My clients either have no money or they pretend to have no money, which ends up being the same. So really got to be very, very strategic in what we're doing upfront. So it's not like you design at the end, you say, okay, it could be this or that, because it's a question of live or die. It took me until very recently that I saw Lucan's SOC, and so the building highly got informed by that. It's precast concrete put together as a house of cards. Daylight is a wayfinding device, but this skylight here I only got because I built it to the Passive House standard, which is the highest energy efficiency standard, or one of the highest in the world. And only because we were able to make sure that we need that to get the passive solar gain. The client wanted to value engineer that. So again, living up to these standards, you could use that in a positive way for your design strategies. I'll just walk you through the building a little bit. The building again becomes more an infrastructure again. It's a raw framework that basically the kids and their activity with their color basically fill. And slowly but surely the building to the south becomes more a building. You got these frames, and there are these textile shadings that go down due to the 3 feet width. You don't have to pull them all the way down. You still have a view into the garden while being protected. You got the stack effect you guys talk about, get the heat out. And last but not at all least, they're 3 feet deep, and that's the height of the kids, so they lounge in them. So it becomes furniture. And there is something fantastic about the effort is high. So this is another Passive House building here. This is triple pane glass we talked about all the time in studio today. So it allows the kids to have that cozy little nest directly behind the glass. This was 3 weeks of blizzard, and there was no sun out there, and the building basically really, really keeps the heat. So it's sort of this, cocooning, this igloo within an igloo, and the building at the end becomes form, and it's sort of this abstract, again, land art in the landscape. Back to Tucson, yes, all of a sudden it snows in the foothills, and the water pipes freeze, and the oranges fell off the trees, and the old people tell me that didn't used to be the case, so maybe something is going on. And then I walk to school and I see this kind of nice but desperate effort of using sort of the symbols of what we've done to nature as being petroleum-based styrofoam cups. And this is funny, Ulrike just talked about that the tips of the hands freeze the first, right? And that's what they try to protect here basically with that. So how can we improve concrete? This is, I didn't know, and thank you for inviting me. This is for me the headquarters of concrete here. I've never seen so much and so beautiful concrete here. I really have to say I'm blown away. But in the 21st century, maybe we improve concrete. This is David Stone, a collaborator in Arizona, that discovered that you can substitute cement, which is the CO2 problem, by iron powder, which is a byproduct of the steel industry. And basically, as opposed to cement that puts out CO2, this is absorbing CO2 through the curing process. But again, us talking Las Vegas or the desert, should we even build above ground was the question. This is the Sonoran Desert Museum, where you can see the rattlesnake is staying underground for the day and only comes out at night. And a project that addresses that is by Levi. In reference to my good mentor, Bill Borner, who always called these drawdles. So they're a hybrid between models and drawings. So these critical investigations that already sort of upfront making. I don't know why I can't really operate this thing, but hopefully forgive me for that. So the Nebraska, when I came to Nebraska first as a student, and I heard that just like here, there was nothing but prairie. But the early settlers, they found a way to survive, right? It was very intuitive. They followed the natives and looked at them. They were hiding behind the bluffs. And they built the sod houses. This is Stacy, who did a dual degree in CRP and architecture. I'm very proud of her a few years ago. Her thesis was almost therapy because she lived in a small town and she worked for someone who was a developer who started to sprawl that little small town. So she made an anti-proposal, and she was using the typology of the rolling hills so that basically your front neighbor's roof becomes your front yard. So you have 100% privacy and have absolute efficiency as far as the density. So she had like 4 times more density on the lot, which should sell. And I will never forget when you showed up at the local concrete industry. There was this girl and she had these dreams, and these guys, have never been exposed to how how fantastic, a young person's imagination could be, what you can make out of concrete. So absolutely fabulous. So I deeply believe, that you guys as a culture, you were shooting people on the moon. You were able to do things amazingly. And, Bucky's Dymaxion car, Frank Lloyd Wright, for me, really little things he did, like the solar hemicycle, nicknamed the Jacobs House 2 in Madison, Wisconsin in the late 40s. So I'm looking here, the more desperate situation. This is Williamsburg, Lincoln, Nebraska. And these are the stick frame homes, and then they McMansion them, right? They stucco and plaster them. And I said, there is no bad material and there's no bad tectonics. There's just like not really good ways to deal with that. So here I try to sort of innovate the all-American balloon frame system and just beefing them up, beefing up the walls using TGIs, not only at the roof truss, but also as the wall stud, and insulating it with cellulose, being shredded newspaper, to achieve this sort of blurring of the space from the inside to the outside. This is the first kindergarten in my hometown that was built to the Passive House standard, so a net zero building. And the building, again, to the north side is very closed, as it has to be, and it can withstand the full forces of nature that are so familiar to you, because you've got that here as well. This is a student from, she insisted to be called from Persia, so she's a Persian student at Tucson in Arizona who did a wonderful kindergarten out of wood logs for Puerto Rico. So once we grow out of kindergarten, there's higher education, or there's K-12. This is a project for a cafeteria for a school campus. And I'm thinking again about human activity and event, and how can we have a positive influence. This is the tragic Columbine shooting that came back to my mind that happened in a space like that. So it really sensitized me about how do we deal with human activity and event in spaces like that. Once again, too far here. So, architecture in most cases is sort of moderation and negotiation. Here were the neighbors that didn't want the building to be next to them. So we put all the servant space low-key and in the ground just to open the space to the campus, because this is once again, sort of an arboretum kind of campus that we actually didn't really want to build. So I took these yesterday. You're all familiar with them because you go to the fantastic Drake University campus here. This is Mies. God is in the detail, right? And these days, I think, this was the design process here, or part of it. We're doing research on context, local context, but then more regional, national. This is Mies' Promontory apartment. And we do these solar studies very quick and dirty, very early. And, this is like the devil is in the detail here. We decided to make it an exoskeleton. These fins are outside, this beam is inside. So this became the most critical point where you continue the thermal basically level, right? This is the process of putting it together. Once again, it achieves this sort of Miesian-like wide open space that's very multifunctional. To the south, this is a winter condition, just like here, warming up the space by nothing but the sun, whereas in the summertime, this exoskeleton is basically shading the building, so it keeps it cool. Yet, depending on how you look at it, as rigid as it is, it can transform from solid transparency to transparent solidity. And last but not at all least, they're 3 feet deep and wide. So again, reconnecting it to the human being as the center of the design and the exploration. One of my former students wrote, and he's a critic now, and he wrote it the eating temple out of concrete. And that was the least I had in my mind, but I looked into it and I said, yeah, both are basically pretty civic typologies, and I can see that. But what I try to say is that I think when we design buildings in an essential way, rather than in postmodernism, where it's what's specific, you can only see that one thing in there. I believe that if you keep it abstract, you allow different people to see it in different ways. And this is sort of the composite of the final product, that you can look at it in different ways and from different angles. This is a student of mine in Arizona who did a good project for a school, in a high school in Denver, Again, just you see how I make the students walk from the macro down to the micro and doing material explorations, everything that's very familiar to do. It's, if so anything, it's just reinforcing it. So what else do we do, right? We learn, we live, we move, we work, right? So the typology of work, and this is ever since yesterday, one of my favorite buildings that demonstrates so perfectly how climate informs form, and you know it very well because it's in downtown Des Moines, just next door by Gordon Bunshift, and it's currently under renovation. So this project here you know as well because Kellen has nicely chosen it for the poster for this one here. This is a little headquarter building for a wood contractor out in the boondocks in northern Germany. And this is talking context. This is context. This is what's there. And you know, these are cement tiles and brick. And this is how that company used to operate. And it was passed on to the next generation once again. And the young guy basically said, I don't want this anymore. I want to open it up for many ways. So this is the side of the building that uses fiber cement board. So there's a dialogue in materiality, but there's a significant evolution happening here. The building is sort of a good example for the strategy of Gottfried Semper's earthwork framework and enclosure. It's basically a steel structure on a wooden plinth. And you know, the detailing of it, you know, sometimes you know is taking risk. Here, due to code, you have to have a guardrail. But I thought since this nun who's from a next door monastery at an open house had no problem walking up, I thought it's sort of approved from a higher instance. And again, how everything comes together. I'm going to leave. I mean, you're going to have the presentations. If you want to look back into it, you can look at the little bits and pieces here. And a student or a post-student project is Matt DeBoer again. When he got out of school, he talked one of our, America's largest offices, Leo Daly, into launching a project that's converting a Blockbuster video store in North Omaha, which is not the nicest neighborhood, into a bank branch. And just had the chance to, thanks to you, because of the generosity of the travel itinerary, I saw the building. This is the director of the building. And she explained how the building has a magnificent healing impact in that neighborhood. What else do? We need to eat, right? So how do we serve that purpose? And America had a decentralized infrastructure for local community grocery stores. And it's basically been, this is in Lincoln, Nebraska. I thought the students could reconnect, but this year has been taken down, so not so much anymore, so it's going. And so we all know what happened, right? It transformed from decentralized to centralized, and we got the big box stores, and this is a big problem, a phenomenon. So we were approached by a client to build a community grocery store, actually replace an existing one, which I had tried hard to keep it because of the previously explained reasons, but there was no way. I don't know how much you get bothered with budgets. This project was supposed to be $50 per square foot. I should have said no to the project, but I'm not smart enough, so I said yes. So I reached out to the school I first taught, and I knew there would be a precast plant that hired recent graduates. And I reached out to one of them and I said, let's do this together. And every line we draw, he prices. So that way we basically were able to beat. My client was so on the cheap side that he said, well, when I asked, this is a community center, I said, give me money for a bench. He said, no money left for that. I said, okay, we'll never ask again. So I sold this plinth here of the bone structure as to prevent minivans driving into the storefront. And he approached me. He said, did you see that there are the young people there sitting in my building? And I said, no, I had no idea they would do that. Of course I knew. I call this the smuggling strategy. Also, he asked me if I would like it if the ramp, which is truly not one of the most beautiful parts of a grocery store, but they need it, she should do it twice as wide as it needs to be. And I said, sure, makes sense to me. And he was surprised that the youth use it as their skating ramp, as the cleanest place around the building. So again, knowing human activity and event helps us to basically sort of, precondition certain things for our design. They're very essential. and the final product here. I'm hoping, I have this prepared and I also didn't tell the client, that this balustrade here, which is a classical element in architecture to transition from the ground to the sky, I hope this can become a greenhouse at one point, because I talked the structural engineer into that the loads, the roof loads are good enough. Because what I'm doing here is relative. Actually, all my work is relative to restrictions of clients who are not very, very wealthy and so I have to work within these limitations. But the message is, I think these limitations are actually great. I wouldn't want to miss them. I think they're great sort of inspirational constraints, I would like to call them. I had the chance to build another one. There was also when I was still in Lincoln, Nebraska. So I looked at architecture and billboard. So the whole Las Vegas kind of notion. I looked at community centers in Lincoln. I looked at many things that what we do. And oops, jumped over one again. So the materiality is informed also by the trucks that have the tarps. And so we put this banner around the building that, because this is a mercantile topology, so the client expects it to be sort of gestural. So I thought, this is my view again to Diamond Head, and I thought if there's a way the building could transform over the turn of a day with the light changing, that would be an awesome way to go. So this membrane, which is I was hiding the manufacturer's name, which is Ferrari, which doesn't go quite well with that client nature, but he bought into it. So this is this fabric that basically is the awning, and it shades the building in the hot summer conditions with a high sun, whereas it lets the building be warmed up by the sun in the low standing winter condition. At the same time, with the sun moving around, it transforms, so it achieves this kind of chameleon effect of being transformative. But I believe that this is actually the really sustainable feature. I have photovoltaics on the roof, but I never claim them to be architectural. They're just technological. But they sure help in this grocery store. Other than the other one, I was able to also design, or at least have an impact on the interior of the. And these are actually special food storage things that they have lids, so you keep the cold actually within the things, and you don't cool the whole thing. And the energy we need, we basically majorly take from the photovoltaics of the roof. So it's another building that gets close to the Passive House standard. Tyson, my student in Nebraska, also part of that Albion Repioneering series, remembered his grandma that she was keeping food cold underground in the cellar and the basement, and he made that a major sort of motivation for a very nice local community grocery store. The last typology I want to share with you is related to what we're already doing. We need to, I think, communicate. So I think communication is really key to spread the word, to talk about these things. So this is a typology to design a coffee shop. Again, I had never designed a coffee shop before. And so I asked the client what he had in mind. In fact, I had designed one before this, and my client basically, I said, "You wanted to have the same?" And he got angry at me. And he said, "No, I want a very, very customized one just for me." And I said, "What do you want?" He just go on my website and see what I have. So the program was just like make a coffee shop where there's actually a coffee roaster. So he wanted a presence in the public, which he didn't have. So we went and looked at, the sort of the literal, but yet sort of inspirational associations he was communicating on the website. We thought, how could we materialize that? And there's the question is, about sustainability. Are typologies which are more short-term based, do they allow you to use material that you throw in the dumpster after a couple of years when it has to be remodeled? And I approached it as an architect, and I said, no, if we make it permanent and durable, it will be around, and people will, it allows to wear and tear, and you don't have to waste material. So we basically paired each of these notions with materials, and we worked again very early with the industries here. This is a product here that you basically know very well, because the Chipperfield's Des Moines Library glazing is the one with the expanded copper is basically an Okalux product. So we were not fans of having coffee beans being blown up and printed out and glued on basically plywood and put it up. We basically said we want the real bean, And we worked with Lux. They sprayed silicon on the first glass, seated them in, then laminated the other one. And what came out of that is basically this situation here where the counter becomes this object that's backlit with LEDs. And if you stay long enough, which is also anti what they want you to go fast so you consume more. But we said this is a sense of place. It's sort of architecture. And I'm really glad to know that you have all these disciplines in your building. So I would like to encourage you to work together. That, it becomes, again, architecture is all these facets that you basically have inclusively in your program here, interior design and architecture, that there isn't a disconnect. This typology is also what introduced me, and I'm getting to the end of the lecture here, to Hawaii, which is a student, Amber Harrell. I made them do independent, zero-net coffee shops all around the world, and she chose Hawaii. That's how I got to know Hawaii. So all these things together, I really believe that it's important to think about what we're doing. We're responsible, we're stewards of our world, and I can't help myself to move around with eyes wide open. I just recently learned that the palm tree is not native to these exotic islands. It is what I learned, it's an exotic, that's how the plant people call it, because it comes from Asia originally. But then it's so genius that the storm gets the coconuts off and it washes them away, and they can basically float for miles and miles and miles and thousands of them to then get washed on another island, and they can grow roots where no one else can grow roots, basically in the sand. And then they develop this perfect symbiosis of form and performance, can withstand the storms that are prevalent and so it goes on. So I'm actually lucky to be here. This picture not only shows you that Martin has a new bicycle, but also that we had Hurricane Ana getting, again, dangerously close to us. We were able to escape once again. But then sort of the irony that, they have this huge combustion machine shredder that takes down the palm trees and cuts them down, as opposed to the old guy who clipped them, and then they shred them. And then we call this machine Hurricane, at least these are serious inspirations for me and motivations for doing better in the discipline. And I think it's really in your guys' hands to re-engineer, to rethink your culture, your economy, your ecology. This book is pointing out, probably most of you or many of you know the book. It's one of my other prime mentors, Patrick Rand from NC State, who never forget when he said, Martin, sustainability should be like gravity. We deal with it, but few projects basically where that's the concept. So basically it's something that's natural to us. And that's, after today's review, I have very high hopes that will be the case at this school here, that it's really infused into you. It's not a superficial thing that you learn on the side. It's really something that you know. But I think we also need to be open to other disciplines. I create these kind of terms that help me to reflect on things. I call this the high declimization of Birkenstock architecture. And it relates to that there have been so many great attempts. I pointed out Frank Lloyd Wright's solar hemicycle. So many generations of eco-architects, let's call them, have done such a great job, meant so well, but they got dismissed by the general public. So the same, I learned from Birkenstock, who's a true German brand, right? But when I was young, and even today, I never wore a pair of Birkenstock. Nurses wore them, or tree huggers. I was none of them. So Birkenstock found that out, and at one point they knew they were basically restricting their market. And they asked Heidi Klum, and also to be political gender correct, there's Bono also, and they asked them to put a piece of tracing paper over the perfectly engineered shoe and just tweak the notion of it, right? And they did, and ever since you have Birkenstock stores everywhere in the country, and it's cool. And I think we can really, really, really learn from that for architecture. So finally, but last but not at all least, I think at this point in my life and my career, both personally and professionally, I believe it's when it comes from your heart, and it's so wonderful to be back in the heartland here. I think at least I really come from where I come from and what I believe in. And once again, I want to thank my Ohana. This is my business partner and father, Günther, who runs our Dresden branch. This guy you know, and these are my sister and her business partner in Bavaria. And we basically, what I showed to you, what I walked you through is that we wanted to design the system. Well, all these typologies basically are these human activity and events. If we all combine them and then make the physical products of them basically, net zero buildings, we might be getting close to this ideal world and term and buzzword of basically sustainability. So it really comes from how I grew up. I grew up in this urban fabric of Hanover, Germany, dense blocks, just like Hamburg. We lived on this top floor. My dad rented a space, 96 steps down. You call this 5-story walk-up. There was no elevator. There were 96 steps up and down. My parents told me get milk because there was actually the mom and pop shop down there. And I said no because I was the one to get it. And everything was around the corner. My school was around the corner. This open lot was a farmer's market on Fridays. Didn't have a front yard or backyard, but I had this roof terrace. And what I wasn't able to accomplish here, we were able to do on a construction playground. Unthinkable today with liability and getting sued and stuff like that. They handed out, there was a pile of boards, and they gave us a couple of nails and a hammer. And my thumb looked pretty numb at times, as you can. And we basically we're building up, and there was a guy who would call him an inspector who told us, maybe you go a little bit the other way, and not that way. I guess that's my reference for being able to teach structure in Hawaii, right? So you can see that literally that transformed into what we were doing as a firm, that we don't want to get stuck in any kind of typology. We want to do them all. It's almost like still being in school, right? You do this studio with this guy, and then you do that studio with the other girl. And at the end, on the way, you have a whole palette. So the grass is greener on the other side. I would like to encourage you, as great as it is here, and I'm really impressed, you should also get out and travel. My year in the US as a student, was the best in my life. Not that I have a bad life now, but looking back, that was just really the best. So this is my best friend from that year in 1990, Dan Kubrick. He's the only thing I will never forgive him for, that he's associate principal to Helmut Jahn, another German guy. This is my American, which became my American mother, the dean's secretary from way back. Yes, I had hair. And when I went back, my dad is an architect, has been an architect. And he had been commissioned with a little tower in Hanover that the client changed, person switched, and the new guy came in and said, you're done with the job because this building should be really cool, and it goes to Santa Monica, California, to Frank Gehry, which basically meant he's not cool. And they had a little bit bad conscience and invited him for a competition. This is coming full circle to the project that Chris was mentioning, that how she knows me. And they invited him to participate in we had the expo in 2000 coming up, and they invited him for designing a new public transportation artery that would feed the expo, but after the expo connect to, up to that point, not connected neighborhoods. And he already said, well, there's nothing to lose, because even if we win this, it would likely go to Frank again. So we did it, and make it very short because we ran out of time. We won the competition, and we built it. And up to this day, I sometimes can't believe we basically did it. And most people, including Chris as a good example, associate me with this project. So it was a competition. So here's the Nebraska State Kipple. So I just want to encourage you guys to really believe in what you're doing. This is the project here, and also what I want to encourage you, coming from the crits today, all the criticism you got from us is the best you can get. We got many awards for the project. This is one of them here, was the 1999 AR&D award by the Architecture Record. And this is one of the most valuable lessons that Billy Chin is a very well-respected architect that most of you know. Was really critical with Martin, and made him think about materiality and how it could be perceived and how I meant it. And again, lucky me, as it says down here, the guys convinced her that it's okay. So this is a guy at least his work is David Chipperfield, who was part of that jury here. So this is a piece of architecture here that People say it's maybe not the greatest pay building. My greatest one is actually the one that's yours. This is Des Moines Art Center, and they have a beautiful Maya Lin exhibition in there. Chris and I went there yesterday. But this is the NBC Bank in Lincoln, Nebraska by pay. And it's a building that I was exposed to when I was a student, and later on through the academe had a chance to reflect on that. I looked at that building and the big icon of sustainability in downtown Hanover by my friend Martin Haas, who was at that time partner with Banish Architects. And both are very, very private buildings, money buildings, they're banks. But both insisted these buildings to be civic buildings that you can walk through, and even homeless are not being pushed out. So very inclusive pieces of our architecture. So all that really, really informed me and made me go away that at that point, I didn't know where I was going. And maybe at certain points, even when we don't know where we're going, maybe we intuitively know where we're going. So if you haven't enough of me, this is a joke, of course, because you have. But I want to encourage you, if you want to revisit some of the thoughts I have. I got myself into being a talk show master, which I have no talent or education to do. But there's a critical format in Honolulu that's called Think Tech Hawaii. And so we do this show that we call Urban Transcendence with my host partner, Alianra Yamashita. So we do this every Thursday, and it's YouTube, so you can go back in there. And if you want to join the discussions we continue to have. So with that, I really, really want to thank you again. And also I want to thank Kellen for the wonderful sensitive poster you've been doing, and with that sort of reconnecting me to Hawaii, where I currently am. So thank you very much for your patience.
So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, I could bring the microphone up if someone had a question, or if you'd like to just come down to the front and maybe ask your question privately, that's fine too. So if somebody has a question they'd like to ask, raise your hand high and wave it around and I'll bring the mic to you. Okay, we're quiet Midwesterners, so if you have a question for Martin that you'd like to ask personally, feel free to come down, and other than that, thank you for your attention.